Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay I'd like to talk some more, and I've already done a video on this, but I'd like to talk some more about what's happening in Ukraine and Russian objectives, their purposes, their reasons for getting involved there in the first place, and how other parties that should have worked to calm things down have actively worked to try and throw fuel on the fire. So let's have a little talk about that. Now, it's a bit rich that the West around globalist scripted stories that Putin's bad because he's stopping certain news outlets from, or certain stories from appearing, and he wants to control what the Russian people see or have some influence over it. And he's being, there you go, he's obviously a dictator. Well, what do you think's happening in the West? What we've actually had in the West, a sitting president, an elected sitting president, booted off the social media platform, and these same people have got the hide to talk about Putin, who's censoring certain stories and so on. So, but let's there's a couple of things that are true. The entire narrative we're being fed is globalist scripted and globalist controlled. It's exactly the same in Britain as it is in Australia, as it is in America, as it is in Canada and Western Europe. It's centrally scripted, and the globalists are totally in control of that narrative, as indeed they're in control of the entire narrative. Pretty much everything we see and hear and consume in the West is globalist controlled and designed to control what we think and what we believe and agree with and what we're prepared to accept and so on. Now Putin, in terms of one of the major economies of the world, when I say major economy, Russia populate with, if you take in all the sort of surrounding peoples in that sort of Russian area there, it's pushing like 140 million or so. But their economy isn't a whole lot bigger than the economy of Australia with 26 million, it's maybe about the same size as the economy of, say, South Korea, which actually I haven't got the numbers in front of me. 30 odd million in South Korea. So really, the Russian economy isn't big. The structure of the economy is something we need to look at. An economy that's mainly built on services and so on has very little manufacturing depth. It's much harder for them to go to war. They've got to import all their finished goods, whereas the Russians have got quite a large manufacturing sector, a lot of raw materials. So they can sustain a war that requires physical equipment on the ground much better than, say, a nation like Australia could or South Korea could. So they've got a much, the structure there is much more suited to warfare. When I say warfare, I mean tanks, field cannons, aircraft, that sort of thing. But also they've got a lot of quite good programmers, so they're no slouches in the cyber arena either. So they could certainly conduct a war that would be out of proportion to the size of their economy. So that's something. Having said that, war is very expensive, very, very expensive. So if you're going to put a lot of boots on the ground and ships, airplanes in the air and all that sort of stuff, you do need a lot of money to do it. And the Russian economy isn't big enough to sustain a long war where you've got 100, 200,000, 300,000 troops there. The idea of the Russians going to full mobilization and, say, putting several million pairs of boots on the ground with all the support services, all the trucks required, the entire logistical machine, that's just out of the question. It just can't happen. Not on the size of the economy that they currently have. I suppose if they were totally bankrolled by China, maybe they could do that then, but I can't imagine the Chinese would want to throw that amount of money at a conflict where there's no immediate gain for them. Even if Europe and NATO and all those people got tied up in a war in Europe, they'd still, the type of war that China would have to wage to take Taiwan requires they cross hundreds of kilometers of water, with a lot of troops, a lot of resupply, huge logistical undertaking. They have to have total command of the sea and the air and the resources in the United States and in the area around Asia, and indeed from the naval and air resources that would be available to contest their control of the air and the sea would not necessarily be all sucked up or drawn into any war with Russia in European theatre. But regardless of that, I don't think I'd be very surprised if that's going to happen. Now, if Putin had been allowing rainbow flags everywhere, if he'd been promoting transgender rights and had numerous government departments running around putting special courses into universities on how to hate white people and how to hate Russia and hate white society, if he had gay lesbian study courses in the university and gender studies, and if the entire newspapers were handed over to the globalists so they could say how wicked and evil white Russians were, if he was accepting millions of black people from Africa to come in as migrants, he'd be one of the globalist flunky boys, and they'd leave him alone. They'd be singing his praises. Oh, Vladimir's wonderful. He's a great guy. Look how many lesbians are in running government. Black lesbians are running government departments in Russia. What a great guy Vladimir Putin is. He's a top dude. He'd be part of the globalist thing. Now, the only reason that they're going after him is because he won't play the globalist ball game. He won't have lesbians running around gay, the rainbow flags and the transgender. He's, all of these things that are just tools and devices to undermine society, to make it easier for the globalists to institute their program of turning us all into serfs in a new feudal order. Then if he was going along with that, they'd be fine. But he's not. He's not going along with any of it. And in fact, he's pushing back against it. And so that's why they're going after him. The Ukraine thing is just an excuse. It wasn't that, they'd have found something else. That just happens to be a useful little thing to irritate him with. So he's made, Putin's made it very clear, and the Russian government generally, whether it's him or someone else, it wouldn't really matter. So they don't want Ukraine as a NATO plaything or a toy. They want Ukraine as completely neutral and to be, at least pleasantly disposed towards Russia. So that's what they want. Now, that's not really a lot to ask for in the overall scheme of things. So I think that's really, objective, one of the two main objectives. The other objective is to have that 90% Russian area in the Donbass, around Donetsk and that Donbass basin generally, have that as an independent republic. And I wouldn't be surprised if one day it did get absorbed into Russia, but as independent republics. And again, I don't think that's a lot to ask, and they have been at the negotiating table for quite a while. But the West, US, NATO, particularly the US, has put their own little flunky stooge in as president of Ukraine, and they've told him, don't you agree to anything that the Russians want, and irritate them and annoy them as much as you can. And if there's any bad comes of it, we'll back you up. And they've given the Ukrainians weapons and that sort of thing. Now, there is some talk of escalating the conflict, such as having a no-fly zone, which I don't think is going to wash, or rotating fighter jet aircraft out of Poland, which I think would be dumb of the Poles to do that, assuming they did it. But maybe they're going to get leaned on. Maybe the top politicians there are going to be offered waterfront mansions in Florida or something. Who knows? But I don't think the Polish politicians are quite as keen to sell out their own people as say the British or Canadian politicians are, who are selling out their own people without a moment's drop of a hat. So just coming back, Putin's objectives, I think, are to just secure the Ukraine as a completely independent and at least favourable to Russia, and they probably wouldn't mind if it was a pro-Russian administration there in Ukraine, and have that eastern Ukraine in the Donbass basin, have those two provinces there declared as independent republics. So And I think if Putin gets that, he's secured his objectives. Now, if he wanted to, he could have gone into Ukraine really hard. If he wanted to, he could have really sent the troops in and told them, okay, but bomb them back in the Stone Age, to use an American term. But they're showing a lot of restraint. They're trying to, it's a war of maneuver as much as anything, where they're trying to make it so that the Ukrainians realise, look, there's no point in carrying on here. We can't offer any effective resistance, and we can't stop the Russians taking the objectives they want. And we're just outmaneuvered, outgunned, outskilled, the whole thing. And we might as well just cut a deal with them. And I think that's where Putin's going, because the casualties have been incredibly light for the amount of troops, and incredibly light for the amount of troops on the ground, which means there's no fierce fighting, as much as the globalist media try to beat it up. And Miss Ukraine in her swimsuit went and with her bare hands tore 100 Russian tanks to pieces. So brave, stunning and brave. And all the other idiotic stuff we've been hearing. Like, if you look at the amount of planes that are supposed to be shot down and tanks that are supposed to be knocked out, I mean, these are military victories of stunning proportions in anyone's language, and clearly they're not happening. And I don't know why the mainstream globalist controlled media is pushing stories that are that fanciful. Again, pictures of beauty queens going to the front lines to fight. Oh, what crap! But the resistance, because the Russians are being so careful to try and avoid serious casualties, and to try and, again, in a war of maneuver and positioning and so on, are trying to get the Ukrainians to just either get rid of Zelensky or cut a deal with them. And I think if they get a new administration, say, look, we're not going in NATO, we'll sign a treaty to that effect, and we'll agree to those two republics in the Donbass being created. I think it would end overnight, in my opinion, at least. But this is not what the globalists want. The globalists either want Russia to agree to rainbow flags and black lesbians everywhere, or that Putin goes and an entirely new administration comes in which does agree to those things. I don't think they'll get it either way. The third option is they go to war with Russia. I don't think that'll happen, and I think if they invade Russian territory, which would be ill-advised in my view, I think it would suck in vast resources and a lot of casualties. Now, just on that, let's look at NATO capability. Could NATO feasibly launch a ground invasion of the region, or physically kick the Russian troops out of Ukraine, for example? Well, if you look at we need to look at the logistics here and the whole box and dice, but they would need to put 100 to 150,000 well-equipped, well-supplied, well-supported, with a vast logistical machine, complete air support, obviously wheeled vehicles and tanks and all that sort of stuff, drones, cyber. They'd need the whole suite of offensive and defensive, you want to call it, weaponry and high tech and the whole thing. The boots on the ground. And if you look at it, NATO probably could put that many troops on the ground there without having to go to like mass mobilization or conscription or anything like that. The main forces would probably be British, French, Polish, maybe. I don't think there's any other countries that would have the standard of equipment and training and soldiery to do that. And I don't know how many pink-haired lesbians they're going to put out in the front there. I don't know if the Russians will be very frightened of them somehow. So it'll be all those wicked, evil, Nazi, fascist, straight white males they'll send out to do the dying. And when it comes to dying, they always want the fascists to go out there, don't they? Or the ones they call fascists. So I think 30, 40,000 from Britain, probably something similar from France, maybe again fully equipped, fully trained, fully gigged up, 20,000 from Poland, that sort of thing. And now already you've got logistical issues here where you've got 3+ languages that are going to be there. Now, when you've got rapid fire orders going back and forth and interpreting and understanding language, that sort of thing, that in itself is a bit of a hazard. It can be done, but need a very slick logistical machine there. I don't see those levels of skills and organisation in the military I've observed. In fact, far from it. But assuming it's feasible, it's possible that they can put the men and material in there and all the bells and whistles along with it. No, it would need a lot. Very, very expensive. The war in Iraq or Afghanistan is just, you're not talking the same thing. Far from it, not even close. So that would be the NATO could probably do it, but without the active participation, the Germans will probably provide logistical support, maybe field hospitals, that sort of thing, maybe drones. But I can't imagine they'll contribute much in the way of boots on the ground. But it's possible. But I think they would need to materially change their economic structure, and a lot of their manufacturing base would have to be adjusted to go over to war material, which means it wouldn't go into consumption, and so that's some issues. I'm not sure they do that. But really, and if the war turned vicious and there was high levels of casualties, I don't know if the Western countries have really got the stomach for that. The Russians probably do, but I don't think the Western, France and Britain, that sort of thing, I don't think they could stomach heavy casualties. And I think they'd want to cut some sort of deal. I can't imagine the Americans put a lot of troops in there. Again, maybe 20, 30,000, something like that. But I don't think there'd be any more. And they'd certainly want to be, and they'd be mindful of keeping enough in reserve in terms of naval and air forces, at least, to be able to contest any Chinese attempt at over ocean aggression in and around Taiwan or anywhere else for that matter. So I don't think NATO really can do it, and I don't think they want to go to that sort of expense and aggravation. So I think there's a lot of tough talk at the moment. Idiots like morons like that stupid Lindsey Graham and others in the United States. I think they're causing many more problems than they could even dream of fixing. But that's my view. I don't think a war is feasible unless they're trying to bait Russia into attacking Poland, which I suppose is possible. And then they can try and play the moral outrage card. And there'd be lots of photographs of little girls dressed in pink and their dead bodies lying in rubble, and look, that little girl could have grown up to be a lesbian activist, and you got a problem with that, you damn fascist Nazi Hitler. So you expect an escalation of propaganda as they try and gin it all up, but it's not going to achieve anything, I think, for anybody in the end, unless Russia's completely crushed, which I think is close to impossible. Then one way or another, that there's going to be a neutral Ukraine, and no one's really going to get anything out of this. And the cost of annoying Russia is far greater than any benefit. The globalists are outraged and irritated that Putin won't come across and have all the rainbow flags and the black lesbians and the intense black migration. If only he would do that, they would definitely let him off the hook, but he won't do it. So they're prepared to go to absurd lengths. In the same way in the West, they're prepared to tear the legal apparatus of the state, tear democracy to pieces, the legal apparatus, the independence of the media, the independence of the body politic. They're prepared to tear it all to pieces just to get their own way. And look what they've achieved. I mean, goodness me, the price they've had to pay for this achievement, if you can call it that. And I think it's the same with Russia. They're not thinking ahead. They just want crush, and without thinking of the consequences. And I think that's where we're at now. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.